All right, people, we're back for another episode of Talkin' Thrones, but not just any old episode. One could argue that this is the first of the kind of major game-changing final episodes of the show. It has literally been hyped up since minute one of the show, season 8, episode 3, The Long Night, the long-awaited confrontation between the living and the dead in order to help fulfill some part of the prophecy of ice and fire that Benioff and Weiss just promptly forgot about. I don't know, Pat, what are your thoughts before we get started on this episode?
Hey, listen, Dom, I think you and the Talking TV family that's Talking Thrones with us here tonight can totally agree that the long road has come, right? You know, everyone's seen Rambo First Blood, you know, the long road. Everyone gets that reference.
I mean, I got it. I just don't know if the rest of our audience did. I don't know how many people here are.
Let's just say this is the moment where they should have freeze framed and just rolled the credits. They didn't need to go any further.
I agree. I couldn't agree with that more. All of that and more on tonight's episode of Talking Thrones. All right, Pat, we finally made it. Season 8, Episode 3, The Long Night. Like I said, this is a big episode, and I know I've said that for a lot of episodes that we've covered in the past, obviously, Hard Home, Battle of the Bastards, Reigns of Castamere, Watchers on the Wall, but obviously, this one kind of takes the cake over all of them for a couple different reasons. Number one being, obviously, that this is the long-awaited confrontation between the living and the dead. It's been hyped up since minute one, literally the opening scene of the show, when you have the 3 Night's Watch members that we're first introduced to, when we're first being introduced to Westeros, to go out beyond the wall and encounter the White Walkers for the first time. Like I said, we've seen they've been progressively built up as this silent enemy from the north, this massive, seemingly unstoppable force of just undead soldiers that are led by these kind of cryptic, covered entirely white sorceress beings that were created by the Children of the Forest originally as some sort of a defense mechanism against the world of the living. Again, our characters have tirelessly worked in order to try and get everyone together, in order to come together and fight against this one unstoppable threat that is seemingly going to overcome all the kingdoms. And so I feel like, and we talked about this a little bit in the first episode for this season, for this final season, but again, I feel like a big source of confusion for everyone comes from that this happened in the 3rd episode. Not only did it happen in the 3rd episode, but it was entirely resolved in the 3rd episode. This entire massive force that is going to come in and demolish every sort of living creature on the planet, that is going to render all the conflict for the Iron Throne completely moot, and they deal with it all in one episode. I mean, I feel like that reaction alone was kind of overshadowed by some of people's other, like, kind of, for lack of a better word, stupid criticisms. I don't know. Like, what were your thoughts just going into The Long Night and watching it for the first time?
You know, listen, watching it for the first time, I'm like, here we go. Yeah, excitement. We're going to see the Night King versus everybody. We're going to see, like, a pretty spectacular battle. And I think the show delivers. I think everybody that's crying over how dark it is, like, okay, sure, a little bit dark, I get it.
For my money, also never had a problem. I've watched this episode more than any other episode of the show. I've never had a problem with the visibility.
Listen, you still get the story that's being told. It's, this is more an indictment on, streaming services and essentially the bits that they're sending our way, and the fact that it's highly compressed and, it ends up on our end, not looking so good. So, let's complain about it. Let's get these streaming services to stream us better quality stuff. But ultimately, I don't think that says anything about the story here. It's supposed to be the darkest day humanity has ever had. So, regardless if it's the theme of the story, I think going to your point about everything being resolved here in this episode with the Night King, I think what would have made a much better, compelling final season would have been, this seems like the final battle, but really the Night King only sent his number 2 guy, and the real army is heading south towards King's Landing. And, now they're going to, Daenerys, Jon, any of the survivors are going to have to go down there, convince Cersei that she's in big trouble, And you know what? It's like finally, it's like Cersei's anger towards everybody and refusal to work together leads to something like the bells, where Daenerys just makes a decision like, the dead are coming. We better just get rid of Cersei by any means necessary. And that causes internal conflict amongst everybody, with the Night King still marching on them. And so, here it is. You got to figure out who's going to rule this world. And you have this still this force coming towards them. That could have been something that could have, basically kept the stakes high, elevated the stakes even higher. I don't know. To me, it started with the Night King. It should have ended with the Night King. That's my only analysis that I really have with this final season.
Well, it's just the biggest source of confusion I feel like that people had is the fact that at the end of the day, right, the Night King was ultimately the big bad that people were going to have to overcome, not Cersei, right? The thing that had always been established since minute one of this show, literally, like I said, if we're going back to that first episode, as far as how it was established, it was that the conquests and the squabbles for the Iron Throne were always going to be secondary. They were always going to be the thing that our attention was focused on, while you always had this overlooming threat that was ultimately going to resolve and be kind of the pinnacle of the show. So for them to wrap it up and kind of almost like pull a fast one on us, if you will, it just kind of once more, like you said, reeked of them pulling some of their Beavis and Butthead moments, which is that they almost felt like they had to, for lack of a better word, pull game over on the audience for seemingly no reason. Because like I said, it feel like it ties into our points that we brought up in that first episode about them choosing to focus on, okay, well, what if it's almost like when they were planning out this season, they came up with where it's like, okay, we have the Night King, and yeah, we could do the traditionalist route where it's like, oh, we just have them fight him, where we have them lose at Winterfell, and then they have to continue to fighting him all the way down south. And then they probably said, but that's boring, and people have seen that before, and they're expecting that. So what if instead we resolved everything at Winterfell? We had Arya kill the Night King out of nowhere, even though that's not at all been built up at all over these last couple seasons. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use that as part of our crazy last minute reveal to make Daenerys go crazy and make her the real villain of the whole show, as part of our whole thing that it's like, no, the Iron Throne, that's what this was really all about. And it just, a litany of that just makes no sense at all. But I just can't help but feeling that that's the thought process that goes through their head, because it's the only thing that really lets anything make sense. Because like I said, we talked about kind of the first half of this season being really solid and really consistent, and I definitely believe that for the first two episodes, but this is where it all starts to go wrong ultimately. And what is so troubling for me about not only this episode but the other Miguel Sapochnik directed episode that happens this season, obviously the penultimate episode of the whole show, The Bells, is that both of those episodes are, forget television, some of the most well-directed, amazingly produced episodes of visual storytelling I have ever seen. I still remember watching The Long Night back in April of 2019. I believe it aired, if I'm not mistaken. I think it actually aired the same weekend that Avengers Endgame came out. So just put that in perspective as far as the fact that we got those two things in the same weekend. And I still remember being blown away, just being like, wow, they effectively created an entire hour-long movie. Because the episode, it's also the longest episode of the whole show. It's an hour and 21 minutes, full 81 minutes. So that basically makes it a feature film length, because that's the length of certain feature films. And again, like just the production scale alone, what they're able to pull off with the mix of practical and CG storytelling, just again, like how they're consistently able to, every single time you're like, okay, they can't pull out any more tricks with the White Walkers. How they have the wave coming out of them at the darkness, how they visually display the Dothraki getting picked off one by one with the flaming swords. The Arya doing the, what's it called? Doing the Resident Evil bit in the castle being stalked by the dead, like all of that stuff is just masterful, to say the least. It is so amazingly well done. And what I'll say again is that in addition to, obviously, again, the criticism towards the fact that, okay, people can't see, I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. Like, that's just another one. It's another kind of season 7-esque criticism where it's like, okay, we have all these actual problems here, but this is what you're going to focus on. Okay, just do your thing.
I think it is a home viewing experience problem, and people probably took to arms over it because, this is something that they look forward to for 8 seasons.
Right.
And here it is, the streaming service, and it's blocky, and it's the detail is lacking. And so I understand it from a technology standpoint, why people are upset over it. And I think the argument that, you're trying to make, and I kind of agree with you, is that, you know, the fact that it was dark does not really take away from the story. So I think
Right.
they're two separate issues. I
Right.
think people might incidentally be upset over, you know, this episode and the choice of being so dark, not really understanding necessarily the fact that, you know, the streaming technology is at fault here.
Well, the irony of the entire situation being that everybody wanted to point the flaws at Game of Thrones when the one biggest problem with this specific episode that they were pointing out had nothing to do with the episode in general. It had to do with the streaming services that were putting it out at the time. HBO Max was not a thing at the time. I believe this was still while HBO Now is a thing. But that to me is what kills me about the entire thing, is that of all the many problems that were in this episode and in the bulk of this last half of the show, had nothing to actually do with the show itself, which I thought was just hilarious to say the least. But
Yeah, well, it's a choice they made, and you know, it's also in terms of the distribution to the final end viewer, it's like it ended up becoming a problem. You know, I don't know the full details here, but you know, generally, you know, it's just, you know, you're waiting 8 seasons for this, and all of a sudden here's the climax of the show, and you're seeing all this pixelated stuff on the screen. I can understand why fans were sort of upset considering the time commitment they made in the show.
Absolutely, 100%. So with that being said, like I said, we've built up to it long enough. We spent 70 episodes building up to it. Let's just get to it. The Long Night. Here we go. It opens up on Sam. Fades in. I will say that, like I said, each one of these battle sequence episodes always has, I think, a great build up to the action. This one is my favorite easily, as you're kind of watching all of the different kind of people spread out to where they're going to be, you know, within the castle in order to play their part in the battle. You know, Jon and Daenerys flying the dragons out past Theon, bringing Bran to the Godswood. Arya, Sansa, Davos up on the parapets. Tyrion grabbing his one last drink before he heads down to the crypts. All the forces, you know, kind of in front with the armies. Jaime, Brienne, Podrick, the Hound, Tormund, Sam, Dolorous Ed, Gendry, Grey Worm. They're all kind of readying at the helm. I love like the tracking shots that they're going alongside the armies, really showing that like everyone's breath is out. Like it is, in addition to being obviously the middle of the night, it is also freezing cold. Like they are really, really amping up just kind of the fear and the anticipation. This is what everyone is waiting for, been waiting for this entire time. You have Jorah leading the Dothraki, a little callback to, obviously, you know, season 1, when Jorah being the only one that could fluently speak Dothraki. And obviously, this is another thing I loved how, too, where a ghost, famously Jon's direwolf, was absent for the entire rest of season 6 and all of season 7. So that was another thing that people were up in arms about on social media, was just, where's Ghost? So they made sure, they're like, oh no, Ghost is here, because they make sure they show him right next to Jorah in this episode. And so they're getting ready for the fire and all, for the fight and all that. And you can imagine they're surprised that out of the woods comes not a White Walker, a negotiator, but Melisandre, out of all things. Which I'm like, that's another thing where, first off, like we talked about a little bit of the logistics, and we're going to get into some of the logistics of the logistical problems of the battle plan here. But just first and foremost, they're waiting for this army. They're standing there. The army we know is coming from the same direction that Melisandre is coming from. How the hell did she just circumvent all of them and just magically somehow teleport where she's been in, what, Volantis for the rest of season 7 up until this point? How does she magically get to the forest and just able to walk her way right up to Jorah? And Jorah doesn't instinctively just be like, okay, well, she's living, so obviously she has to be on our side naturally. And then she does the thing where she, you know, sparks up the Dothraki's, I forget what their curved swords are called, but where she spikes up all of their curved swords in fire,
Are they
doing some magical
like
spell.
schemator type weapons?
Yeah, like sights, something like that. I'm not quite sure, but that's all just there to kind of set up for what for what purpose she's going to serve later on. Because Melisandre, it's really weird because obviously they have to wrap her up in some capacity because she's been such a major part of the show that I feel like for her to just kind of leave out of nowhere last season, I feel like they were almost kind of bending over backwards in order to be like, oh no, she still matters towards the story. And ultimately, in hindsight, this is one of those things where I almost feel like it would have been better to just leave her in Volantis, because I mean, I don't know. Say what you were gonna say, but I have problems with Melisandre's usage in this episode.
It's I think the big issue is just, you know, how she appears. I agree with you on that. It's kind of like, you know, it's kind of building us up. Oh, the army of dead, here it is, and then all of a sudden Melisandre comes out, and it's kind of, you know, okay, it's not quite time yet. It's used as a sort of like a little bit of a rise out of the audience,
right?
You know, to fake them out a little bit, and then she comes and she lights the swords, and you know, it's. Right. I think what I like about Melisandre's presence in this episode is more to do with that moment with Arya and what's
Right.
his face,
And Barrack.
Beric. Yeah. So it's like, I don't necessarily. I think it's kind of a little bit harsh. It's like we just need her there. Just get her there. But I think when it comes down to the Lord of Light, just like, well, he must have served his purpose or whatever she says later on to Beric, or about Beric. I think it really does resonate, and it really helps to sort of tie that story together. And it's the whole idea, like you said, like Arya comes out of nowhere, and it's like, well, they at least are using the Lord of Light,
Right.
and the fact that we've seen that all series long, of like, there has to be a reason for this. There has to be a reason why the Lord wants me to
Right.
do
Everything
this.
has to happen for a reason, even if it's
Exactly.
not really
So
explained or doesn't really make that much sense. It
exactly.
kind of
So
just
they
happens.
in essence, I think they do a really good job here, tying Arya and what she does to the Night King into the Lord of Light quest, because the Lord of Light sort of lit a path for her to be the one to put a dagger through him.
Well, that might be all fine and good as far as like within this particular episode. I just wish it lined up with anything else in the show, because once again, like I said, one of my long-standing problems with Benioff and Weiss is to just take series, like deliberately take season-long bits of character development and just undo them within one episode. Where again, who has been set up as the ultimate enemy of the Night King? Jon and Bran. So naturally, Arya has to kill him. Daenerys has been set up as the one who will take the Iron Throne. So naturally, she has to go nuts and succumb and randomly go angry, go mad like her. Like her father, and burn King's Landing to the ground. It's just certain things where it's like, again, moments that feel like gotcha moments for the sake of being gotcha moments, as opposed to actually playing in and filling into the story. Where again, I feel like if they had built up Arya more as being like a secret servant of the Lord of Light, aside from just that one random
Well,
meeting
she
that
doesn't
her and
have to be
Melisandre had back
a
in season
secret
3.
servant. She, is a trained assassin,
Right, but I guess
and
the point being is that if there had
yeah.
been more built up to it, other than just, oh, she's an assassin, so naturally she's going to be the one. And I think of where it's like, okay, but there was nothing to really kind of build to that and kind of get that across. I want to talk about the actual battle plans though, not the whole idea to use Bran as bait and lure the Night King there, because even that one, it's like, okay, that at least makes sense as far as being logistical reasoning, is to get the Night King inside of Winterfell, so that way they could kill him and resolve that tension in this episode, rather than have him like imagine if the Night King had killed Bran in that one sequence. That's still mind blowing to me. Like that to me would have been like tremendous as far as that goes. Like having Bran built up having him be this crazy Dr. Manhattan level sorcerer, super powered being that talks like a robot, and then the Night King just comes in and kills him. It's like, wow, that's the world's whole memory just gone there. Like that would have been insane. But so here's the plan that they have. They have the armies on the outside of this trench, right? This trench that has been built in order to block the Night King. They know that they can't withstand the forces of the dead that are going to be coming at them, rightfully so, because it's literally all the dead soldiers that the Night King has converted. There's infinite hundreds of numbers of them. So naturally what's going to happen is they're going to fight the dead out in the open. The dragons are going to come and light everything up. Then what they're going to do is they're going to bring everybody inside the castle, inside the trenches, and they're going to signal the dragons to light the trench, assuming that nothing will go wrong at all. And to my thought process there is, why didn't they just put everybody inside the trenches and just have the dragons light them up to start off with? Because then you wouldn't have had the problem of them going for the walkers and then the storm coming out of nowhere and then them trying to signal them, and that doesn't work. And so naturally they need to bring Melisandre out in order to light the torch, in order to have a last minute thing right there. And I'm just like, that's what doesn't really make sense. Grey Worm doesn't have to sacrifice half his army if they don't do that. So that's just immediately the first thing here that it's like, wait, why are they doing this? Like, I don't know. Maybe you can find something in there that maybe I'm not seeing.
What I will say is the Dothraki sort of charging into the black,
Right.
and
No, the Dothraki charging, that makes sense. That I'm fine with, because the whole thing with the Dothraki is they are meant to fight in open field, open combat. They're not good being constrained behind enemy lines. So that I'm okay with. I'm talking about the rest of the army.
But ultimately, knowing the Night King's power of slaughtering everybody and then raising them up, to use against you, the Dothraki are relatively useless in this type of battle,
right?
Because
right.
They are cavalry, and there are a lot of them, but there's a lot more dead. So, I think sending them out there was almost like, of course they're gonna die and be raised and be sent back. Like towards the other
Right.
soldiers.
But hey,
Um,
apparently not as many of them died as we thought because we see them 2 episodes later. They're apparently back in full force when it comes to charging King's Landing.
Yeah, I don't know.
Riddle me that one.
It's kind of weird to me. I like the flames and all that stuff.
Right.
It
It's a
it
great
looks
shot.
cool.
It's a great visual display as far as showing just how outnumbered even a force as powerful as the Dothraki are against the dead. I thought that was a great visual display in order to kind of kick off the episode.
I think ultimately, like, you're not going to really be able to argue like, oh, they came up with like some bizarro game plan. I think it's you don't really get into the minds of the characters and laying out a battle like this. You're really thinking about what's going to make cool sequences, and so like the Dothraki running out there and sort of being slaughtered, that makes a cool looking sequence. Having the dead clash with all the infantrymen and kind of fight, and the dragons swoop in and all over the place, and,
Right, blowing shit up. Like I said, the shots that we get are awesome. Like there's not a single bad shot in this whole episode.
So I think they didn't necessarily rely on realism of army plans to build this and construct this episode. It's just like what would be cool, what would sort of like allow us to sort of build the tension. I agree with you. That the game plan seemingly could have been better. Maybe chalk that up to the fact that all the experienced army leaders have been killed over the years of the show. They just they're winging it. They're feeling it. They're kind of like,
that's fair. That does
using the force to use a.
Yeah, we also what happened with John when John tried to lead an army the last time is Sansa had to have Littlefinger come in and save them. So that is fair.
Yeah. So you got to get past that. It's one of those things where I kind of agree with you. Like, it seems like they just put out a lot of men to be slaughtered needlessly.
Right. Needlessly. Just in order to show a visual display.
One of the things that I think broke the tension for me was the reliance on the dragons to light the trenches, because they could have built, first of all, bigger trenches because they knew an army of the dead was coming. So you kind of know there's
the one thing I will say to that, the only thing that I will say to that, surprisingly enough, as nitpicky as we are getting, is that Sansa's been in charge for the last however long it's been since Jon left and originally came back to Winterfell. We all know that Sansa's priority has been on reinforcing and making sure that Winterfell has enough supplies to last the winter, not necessarily on reinforcing the castle against enemy soldiers. So that may have been what, and so we know that the last minute preparations that they were making once Jon and Daenerys got back were cut very short because the dead broke through the wall before they got back to Winterfell, so they barely had any time to prepare. So that's the one thing I will say.
No, that totally makes sense. It aligns, but it's just one of those things. If the trench was bigger, if they basically maybe put some oil in there where a couple guys could actually shoot some arrows
run out,
and light it
on
fire.
Right, light it on fire.
Yeah. So there's so many things, and like I guess my point is, you're telling me a totally valid viewpoint of that, but where is it in this episode where it's like, someone that's just like, oh my God, those trenches are too small, like. It's like we didn't have time, man.
Right.
And also,
the other thing I will say in fairness is that at the very least, too, nobody knew that the Night King could magically just control the weather like that. I mean, there was a little bit of like they saw the clouds incoming at Hardhome when that attack happened, but like to my knowledge, like nobody knew that in addition to resurrecting the dead, the Night King could also control the weather. But then again, there's also been like allusions to that. They've always been really vague about that, where Jon back in season 6 was like, oh, our enemy is not going to wait out the storm. He brings the storm. But it's like, okay, so did you guys know that he can control the weather or didn't he? Because I mean, I don't know. It definitely feels like short-sighted when, wow, the White Walkers are standing right there. We're just waiting to be dragon fired. And oh no, they're totally defenseless. I'm like, that's almost one of those moments where just dramatic irony just kicks in. And I'm like, come on, guys. You should both know better than to try an easy shot like this and think it's going to work,
Yeah, I don't know. It's like the fact that they can, seemingly control the weather. It's like, it's true because, and I think those shots are weird to me because it's again like comes out of nowhere. It's like all of a
Right.
sudden they're flying blind and
Right. And
doing like
crashing into each other and all this stuff. And it's like,
yeah,
so
exactly. And
you have
it's
all this badass stuff with the dragons, and because you can't willingly like take them out because you have to only save it for the one scene where they fight with the Night King and the undead dragon. Instead, you're just gonna have to spend most of the time just bumping into each other in a random snowstorm, and then like they do this one cool shot where they fly up close to the moon and they can see the sky, and oh, look up how high they are, and then they dive down, and that's what they do for most of the episode.
yeah, I don't know. I feel like we're bouncing between two viewpoints here. Like one is like there's some really cool action, some cool shots. I think they take a lot of liberties to get to them.
Oh,
And
to say the least.
I think that's where we're sort of arguing is like, it's just this is a big spectacle episode, and 100% like, it's they take that road of just like, who cares? Let's just like do this cool thing. And I don't think it's necessarily bad. I think everything that happens prior to them getting into the castle is exciting.
I agree.
It is
exciting. It's pulse pounding. It's tension filled. The shots of the massive forces of the dead coming at them, and like I particularly love the one shot when Tormund's looking and he's seeing the dead just overrun the Unsullied before they like charge at them progressively, and you see everyone's reaction and them fighting. Like and like the mess of it all. Once the storm sets in, all the bodies dropping. We get our first main character casualty when Dolores Ed gets stabbed in the face. It's all great stuff. Like you said, the problems start with the lighting of the trench and them retreating inside the castle because now you'll just have the dead who previously have been shown to be afraid of fire to the point where they would deliberately go around it in order to try and get into it, right? The White Walkers, we know they're immune to fire. Fire doesn't affect them, as is proven in this episode, but the whites, the undead soldiers, they are terrified of fire. Up until now, when they're just being commanded to just go and lay down over the trench, and so that they can like almost create a bridge for their fellow dead soldiers to get over and start attacking the castle. And that's when just mayhem starts, and you have the dead swarming over the castle walls, taking out people one by one, except for our named characters who magically are managing to survive everything. That's when Arya kicks in, tells Sansa to get down to the crypt once she realizes that things are really about to get topsy-turvy, We'll get to the crypts in a bit, because it's still, to me, the most pointless section of the episode as far as for a lot of different reasons that people are saying, The giant breaks through the walls. We unfortunately see Lyanna Mormont die in one of the most badass, but also one of the most confusing deaths I think I've ever seen, where the giant grabs her. Oh, no, sorry. The giant is knocking people. The undead giant is knocking people aside. Knocks Lyanna aside. She somehow survives. Charges the giant because she's like, "Oh, I'm a 10-year-old girl. I'm totally gonna take down a giant." He grabs her, lifts her up to his face just close enough. So I'm like, "What is he trying to eat her or something? Like, what is the point of it? Just crush her." And as she's being crushed, she somehow was able to reach her arm out enough for her to stab it in the face with the dragon glass dagger. It's so awesome, and it makes no sense. It's like something out of a Sylvester Stallone '80s movie, like, but unironic. It's really confusing.
Yeah, no, it's listen, they're just going full blown action into this episode, and it's like, would that have happened realistically? Probably not. Like the giant would probably have killed her prior to her getting close enough to stab it in the eye.
Right.
But again, it's like everyone loved that character. And they wanted to give her this, make her really elevate her from lovable character to hero pretty much right away. She's only been in here since season 7, so it's one of those things where you just kind of roll with it, and I think this whole thing is about an hour and 20 minutes. It is a fun battle sequence. There's things that they're not realistic,
to say the least.
And I think I don't think you're wrong in sort of bringing that to everyone's attention.
Right. But I guess I feel where the conflict we're coming from is it's like, is this annoying me, or is this contributing to kind of like the dumb fun that I'm having? Because that is a thing that happens, where people are able to watch stuff, understand that what they're watching is dumb and makes no sense, but they're having so much fun watching it that they don't care. And that's kind of always been the push-pull back and forth with me with this episode, is I'm like, oh man, I'm having so much fun, but oh man, this makes no sense, but oh man, that scene was so awesome, but how did they do that? But oh man, look, they're fighting, all 3 dragons are fighting, their previous brother is now undead, and it's like, I do have a little bit of thinking where it's like, okay, so Rhaegal and Drogon, who've literally grown up with Viserion, and now all of a sudden they're able to just fight him with no problem, I will say that, like, the fake out of them fighting the Night King, even though that one is kind of intentionally dark and feels like almost a little bit too obviously so intentionally dark in order to cover up the CG, but it's still awesome. I love the dragon fight. I'll always be down for some dragon fighting. Rhaegal takes some hits in that fight because Jon is just going at him like crazy before Daenerys comes in, knocks the Night King off of the undead Viserion's back. Rhaegal crashes in the snow, and Jon goes charging for it. That doesn't work at all because, once again, Jon has not learned his lesson at all because rather than charging for the Night King, he pauses when the Night King turns around and sees him and waits for the Night King to raise his hands and raise up all the dead soldiers around them. And it's like, Jon, you've seen this happen how many times before? You should know what to do. You have a clear shot at him, and he just stands there like an idiot. I'm like that. How crazy? Jon
again,
Snow, the hero of Westeros.
It's doing it for dramatic effect. It's not like
But this is a problem that I have all the time, and this is not just exclusive to Game of Thrones, but in a bunch of other things where it's like, again, the idea of doing something for dramatic effect getting in the way of logistical storytelling purposes, where there is no reason at all why he should be stopping.
That's the technique. You know, it makes dramatic television hard for me to watch as well, Dom. Because, right. It doesn't have to be Game of Thrones, but you know, the fact is like, that's unrealistic. Why would you be pausing here? Right. Why would?
And I'm not even talking about television here. I've seen that in a ton of movies too. Like a ton of movies.
No.
Well.
It happens, but it's about conveying, you know, emotion, right? You know, so here's this emotion of like extreme fear as he raises the dead back to life. You know, like, can we actually do this? And the answer is probably no, right? You know, right. And so the audience has to be, you know, have time to digest that. And, you know, therefore, you know, if you're looking at it through the lens of realism, it's like, no, that wouldn't happen. Right. You know, like, and so I think for me, for you, more than likely, the fact that, you know, we studied film and we kind of watch television, you know, all the time, and we're kind of obsessed with this medium. You know, it's kind of something that we see all the time. We you know, and it's overdone and it works for most people. But if you're kind of in that realm of like, you watch so much of this and you see it all the time, you kind of get desensitized to it.
Well, I'll tell you what it is for me that kind of ruins a lot of moments like this is it all has to do with character, because I'm usually, surprisingly enough, like I said, when you talk about like kind of those moments that are done for dramatic effect, I'm okay and on board with them if it makes sense for the character. And like I said, if this was Jon in season 4 or 5, when he really hadn't had that much experience fighting the dead and he was only just seeing the Night King, it would make sense for him to stop and stand there because he's scared shitless. This is not that same Jon Snow. This is Jon Snow that has gone south, faced dragons face to face, is literally riding a freaking dragon, has fought the dead multiple times at this point, has literally come back from the dead, and he's still stopping and standing there like an idiot. That's where the disconnect for me comes in. There's nothing, at least for me, it doesn't have to do with the fact that it's like just some random Joe Schmo who's seeing the Night King for the first time. It's Jon Snow, the dude who, again, up until this point has been built up as one of the guys who might possibly get a shot at killing him and has the most experience on him, you know, aside from Bran. So that's the thing that kind of is constantly the source of disconnect for me in that scene. The Night King raises the army. They all start going at him. Daenerys comes in, saves him. He charges after him. The Drogon is paused long enough for the dead to get on him, so they start messing up. Oh, I also forgot the scene also where Daenerys tries to light the Night King on fire, and that just doesn't work at all. Like I said, that kind of fully officially establishes that, okay, so the White Walkers, they're immune to fire. But again, the one thing I'll say about that was established in a previous season, so I'm okay with that because that was established in the door when the Children of the Forest were trying to protect them against the army. They chucked out the bombs that lit off the line of fire, and the White Walkers just walked right through it. So that, at the very least, was established in a previous
it's
episode.
Established. You know, it is kind of weird for a story that's called The Song of Ice and Fire, and the guys that are made of ice can't melt.
Well, who knows? Like I said, that could potentially be something that Martin was trying to say, because like I said, I believe there was a draft where Martin originally had the dead winning and everything. So it would make sense. It's like, oh, what if they are the perfect collusion of ice and fire, you know, where they are the ice that puts out the fire? I don't know. I'm making shit up as I go along, but I don't know. That's just something that I was potentially speculating about.
Yeah, it's like I will say this, like the opening, sequence of this episode is, you know, it is a war sequence, and, you know, it does kind of, take you on an emotional roller coaster. I don't think there's really too much of a story going on. You know, it's just like, it's just cool stuff happening.
Right.
It's like
Exactly. And that ultimately is the problem of the episode. There really isn't a story per se. If
yeah,
anything, I
well,
feel like
they're
the
dealing with
only
an
story that
ensemble
there's anything
cast.
happening for is Arya. But even that one, again, just because it's not going any off of anything that was previously established. So that's kind of where the disconnect comes in. Because if Arya is supposed to be the savior, if Arya is the one that this was about the whole time, her standing on the parapets of Winterfell to helping to fight the dead, to being made aware that she's apparently the subject of this other prophecy that we completely forgot about because it was just a other thing, and she's the one that ends up saving the day from the dead and saves them all, despite all these characters' deaths. It's like there's no connection there, and that's ultimately the problem. Is this is an episode that I think more than any previous battle sequence episode in Game of Thrones, that's the thing that we always talked about with the battle sequence episodes that made them so impactful, made them some of the best episodes of television and of the show. It wasn't that they were these crazy spectacle moments. It was the fact that they had an underlying incredible story underneath it. Blackwater, kind of Tyrion overcoming, the what's called the pre-imposed expectations on him in order to win against Stannis, the Watchers on the Wall, Jon and Sam and the rest of the night with Watch members' ultimate journey to maturity as they're fighting and surviving against the wildlings, Hardhome, just that brutal attempt at survival against an enemy that they ultimately were not expecting and could not win. Battle of the Bastards, how ultimately at the end of the day, Jon's inexperience and cockiness almost got him killed, And this is the first episode where there isn't really a story. It's just a series of events that are just happening, which one could argue that sure is the point of this episode, but that's never really been a thing that Game of Thrones has done in the past, which is why it feels so weird and so alienating,
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons why it could be problematic is because it's an ensemble cast, and you're trying to basically tell multiple stories here in different areas of the event. So it bounces from
right.
Like you said, you have Jon and Daenerys.
Right.
You kind of have Theon and
right. And they do their best in order to batch off the characters, but you're ultimately right. It's a massive ensemble cast that obviously Game of Thrones has always done very well with in the past. But again, it's the fact that the almost 95% of the named characters that are still left alive in the show are all in this one event. There's only like 3 characters that aren't there. And so them trying to give everyone something to do in this one episode, and ultimately kind of is like, yeah, it's going to be literally impossible to do that.
I don't know. I agree with you, because they focus on the ensemble and kind of trying to let us keep track of everybody and give us a little bit of here, a little bit there. That the underlying story, which is, it is of Arya.
Right.
And really her struggle. And what I like about her struggle is the fact that she's unwilling to give up. She keeps fighting. She's put in these bad positions. And I forgot what character it was, but it's pretty much like, they're looking at Arya and they're like, tell her that. Tell her.
Oh,
that
Beric, yeah. When Beric and the Hound are fighting, the Hound is naturally retreating because of his fear of fire, and he's like, we can't beat them. And then Beric looks at Arya and is like, okay, so if that's the only person you care about in the world, tell her that because she has just as little reason to keep fighting as you do, but yet she's still doing it. And once again, just showing that Beric is one of the realest characters on this show.
And so I think, I think that's a great story. I think Arya and Beric and the Hound and even Melisandre really kind of come in and become the strongest story.
As far as definitely kind of overtaking the primary struggle, because like I said, everybody else is up Schitt's Creek without a paddle. They're all pinned down. You have that great tracking shot where Jon's running through the courtyard of Winterfell trying to get to the Night King and Bran, and he just sees all of their friends and allies just covered in bodies. Sam is literally on a pile of corpses just stabbing away. Jaime, Brienne, and Pod are trapped in a corner. Tormund and Gendry are on top of a pile of dead men. Grey Worm is doing his best in a corner, but he's, lone man standing. And so Jon is just left to just run around like an idiot being chased by Viserion because Viserion is blocking him from getting to the Night King in the courtyard. The battle's even reached Theon and his Ironborn, who have almost all died protecting Bran, including Alice Karstark, unfortunately, R.I.P. to her. And so you have kind of this really interesting, like kind of almost like Resident Evil-esque like zombie chase where it's like, okay, so now all of a sudden the dead, which previously have just always moved like crazily and super fast, and now Arya's just kind of trying to hide from them in the castle. It's a cool scene that's really only there in order to show up. It's like, yeah, we can do zombie storytelling too. And then obviously, just the pandemonium ensues again. And it results in Beric and the Hound getting to her. Beric throws his flaming sword, which is a massive mistake. And then that just leads to, I'm not going to say a character death, but that was very choreographed out. But like, I will say that like Beric, I feel like got done a little bit dirty, where this guy again is like, I mean, Derek had a ticking clock on him really since Thoros died last season, but now it's very apparent that it's what's it called, that his time has come, and they make it to the room, but he's already taken too many knives. And I will say it was really sad seeing him go, because talk about a character that people I feel like had almost forgot about. He was just a secondary character that kind of came in season 3 and was just kind of off. Arya spent a lot of time with him, but then when she ran away with him, he was almost kind of forgotten about. And then when they brought him back in season 6 in order to kind of help, continue to build towards the coming threat of the Night King, he really became, like, I think, a surefire source and a source of inspiration, I feel like, for a lot of characters. For the Hound, for Jon, obviously he was an ally of theirs when they went beyond the wall, and it was really sad kind of seeing him go. And then, of course, leads to the Melisandre prophecy moment with Arya, where she's like, oh, out of nowhere, out of all these prophecies, now you're a subject of a prophecy too. You're going to close 3 sets of eyes. And I'm trying to remember very hard, but I don't remember her saying that prophecy to Arya back in season 3. I could be wrong. I'd have to go back and rewatch the clip, but I don't remember her saying that to Arya in season 3. I don't know. Like, do you remember that, or?
Yeah, I'm unsure what you're referring to. Maybe.
Well, so the whole thing that she says is like, when we've met once before, and you'll close 3 sets of eyes, one brown, one blue, something along those lines. I think the whole thing is that it's supposed to be building off of what she said to Arya when they first met back in season 3, when she first took Gendry, and it's supposed to be building off of that, and that's what kind of makes her realize what it is that she's going to do. But it's like, I don't remember her saying that to Arya originally. It still makes no sense. Still kind of comes out of nowhere. It's literally like they just had a list of names that came out of the hat. They're like, okay, we can't have Jon kill the Night King. We can't have Bran kill the Night King. And we can't have Daenerys kill the Night King. So who's the next most likely person to be able to kill the Night King that wouldn't make it too ludicrous and out of nowhere? Arya, cool. And they just pulled the name out of a hat, and they were like, okay, how are we going to get there? We'll figure that out later on. And that kind of was what feels like the thought process here. Again, I'm not trying to take away from Arya herself as a character, but it's one of those things where it's like, this was not supposed to be your fate, your destiny,
No,
like, your destiny
I think
was always to be no one.
I think Arya, killing the Night King is definitely plausible. I think.
Right. I'm not saying it's implausible. It makes sense, but just for the purposes of the story.
Yeah, no, I think one of the issues that we probably have, it goes back to the seasons that she spent in Bravos, and just how that storyline of her training and basically ultimately escaping the No-Face God, and sort of coming back to Westeros to become Arya again. That story arc itself was, wasn't really resolved in a satisfactory way. Everything about it's pretty cool. Like, I like the world that they built. I like, I do like the Waif character, even though, it doesn't lead to a confrontation that I think is great. It's kind of just like, leaves us on this: is Arya dead? Is it just the Waif that's going back to Westeros to be her?
Right.
It's kind of like never resolved. It's kind of like open ended. Based on what we see in the latest seasons, we have to believe that it is Arya, and that she kind of got the one up and all that stuff. And I think it's very vague, and I think you could read it either way. And it just doesn't resolve properly. And then she's, here she is back at Winterfell, and she's sort of just like done with her story. It feels like she's just kind of there in a supporting role. And then, here it is, this episode, she got elevated to, the person who stops the Night King.
Right. And it makes it even worse it makes it even more egregious when they try to bend over backwards and try to still make her important to the plot after the Long Night has been resolved, when they have her go with the Hound to try and kill Cersei just so that they can have her in King's Landing magically for when Jon ultimately has to kill the. I don't know. Like I said, we'll save Arya.
I think ultimately it's going to be the fact that I guess it's characters with plot armor, right? We're not going to kill them at appropriate times. They all have to sort of get to the finale. Some of these characters, they basically are not going to kill Arya. They're not going to kill Bran or Sansa. Basically they've made their decision about who gets through the entire series. And therefore it's like, some of their stories kind of like peter out, and they're just sort of, given, they just team up with, Jon, Daenerys and the gang. And then they're just part of that clique. So it's, I don't know. It's one of those things where Arya, I kind of, watching the show multiple times and seeing it here again, I really, I find it satisfying that she kills the Night King. You know, I just think it could have been
Right.
more satisfying.
Ultimately, it's
You
the
know,
fact of it's not the act of her being the one to kill the Night King. For me, I still think the larger problem is just the fact that all of that tension for the whole show was resolved in this one episode, where it
well,
felt like
it's.
specifically
What about Bran? Right, Bran is
right.
kind of
What
like
what what
playing.
role does Bran have to play ultimately, other than okay,
He's
so he's
playing this game where he's like, cornering people and making them feel uncomfortable. He's handing daggers around like they're,
right.
candy,
And like you were saying,
passing
the
them out
red
like they're
herring,
candy.
right? The red herring of last season, where we're meant to believe that Bran gave Arya the dagger because we knew that she was going to kill, because he knew that she was going to kill Littlefinger with it. But in reality, he gave it to her because he knew that she was going to save him from the Night King, which
Yeah,
also brings it up a
so
whole bunch of other problems with Bran as far logistically with that goes. But
so Bran, like he's not using his powers properly. Like it's
right. He just once
there's
again goes into
something.
the birds and gets close to the Night King, and it's like, how are you able to sneak up on him there when you couldn't last season? Like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
there's just something muddy about it, and you got to stop thinking about it, and you got to just go along with the enjoyment of the episode. So I think in terms of tonight, us talking about the long night, we basically have decided to sort of try to analyze every episode and sort of like say what's on our mind and try to find some sense in what we're presented. But this is one of those episodes where I can, turn off the microphone and the camera and, flip on HBO and
Right.
basically watch it again right now. And I would enjoy it. It's a really good popcorn flick type
Right.
of
It's like a
episode.
popcorn blockbuster movie. Like I said, it's very strange how I found myself in those couple months post the show ending and as well into the pandemic when I had nothing else to watch. I would just randomly go to HBO and flip on The Long Night. And I would be like, wow, as a solo, just kind of, for lack of a better word, movie to watch, just on a random one off, this is fantastic. It's when you start to factor it in, take into consideration that it isn't not a one-off movie, that it is building off of all of these seasons and all of these episodes of storyline, and this is supposed to be one of the really big climactic events of the entire show. That's when the problems really start to rise. And strangely enough, that is a criticism that I also have towards the Bells as well, but we'll get into that when we cover that in 2 episodes from now. I really only have 2 more points that I want to cover before we wrap up and get out of here. One is the Crips, the other one is Theon. Just the Crips again. I have to get the logistics out of the way. I know every single other person has brought it up, and but it's true. It's one of those where I agree with. It's like, wow, so you're gonna get all these people, all the innocents who can't fight, in the one place where they can't get to it, and where are you gonna put them? In the crypts full of skeletons that are just ready to be resurrected when the Night King obviously does his resurrection thing. And so that's all fine and good and all, because that actually would probably result in like some really cool and interesting deaths, because the one thing I feel that everybody else on the internet didn't cover was, it's like, okay, where else are they gonna put them? There's no other place where they could put the women and children who can't fight other than the crypts. Any place else in the castle would be vulnerable. So that's kind of their only place.
I think it's kind of a weird thing that you would even put them in the crypts. Like, why not just set them up on foot and head south? Like, they could get a lot of lead time before the Night King arrives.
Right. Right, because they have to, because again, that's the whole thing, is they're operating under the assumption that they're not making it out alive. So wouldn't you want some of the innocents to get out, What
Exactly.
Sansa, who is like the whole
maybe
future of the North?
Tyrion,
Tyrion,
maybe Tyrion and Sansa, who have a lot of responsibilities in terms of organizing the defense. Maybe they would have to end up in the crypts and just hope, because ultimately they're not gonna, if they were to leave Winterfell, they wouldn't be able to lend their expertise to the war planning. So there is the potential for a small group to still end up in the crypt in that scenario. But ultimately, I think it's really just you get the kind of tender moment between Sansa and Tyrion.
Ultimately, what it builds to is the tender moment between Sansa and Tyrion, which is just there, because again, it would be one thing if they died in that scene, but they don't. And also, it's there to have the bait and switch of, oh, the dead are going to come out and start killing all these people, and they kill like a few people, but they don't kill anybody major. They don't kill Varys, they don't kill Missandei, they don't kill Gillian the baby, So it's like, at the end of the day, what was that other than just like what we've been talking about this whole episode. Another cool scene of, oh no, the undead skeleton come back. Like, could you imagine if Sansa found herself face to face with the skeleton of her undead headless father? Like, how crazy would that? And she had to take the dragon glass dagger and stab him. I could think of no better crazy moment to have, where you literally have these crypts that are lined with the skeletons of all these dead Stark rulers, and you're not going to do anything with that.
You know, it seems like it could have, been a little more spectacular in a already spectacle filled episode.
Yeah.
But I think the moment where you have Sansa and Tyrion sort of make peace with their forced marriage and everything that's happened to the two of them,
and that's fine and all, but I feel like I'm gonna do something like
Dom. I think it totally makes sense, and then I think it also leads to what we're supposed to believe is the end moment of the series, where Tyrion, although being a prisoner, basically decides the government of Westeros. It basically, I don't know.
Of course.
It kind of sets that up, in the sense that Sansa and Tyrion do have a mutual respect for each other. And they kind of, in this traumatic event, they kind of reconcile the fact that they were on opposite sides. So, like, there is a story beat here. And I think it's only a small amount of time in the episode, and it serves to sort of cut us away from the main action. And it probably is, I would have to watch it again to make sure, this conclusion is true, but, it probably distracts us from the main thing, which is Arya is going to be the one that kind of sneaks up on the Night King. So it kind of adds one more thing for us to pay attention to.
The other thing, too, also is that it's like, okay, so this is their chance to finally show Sansa as a ruler, and I don't know, like, kind of give, like, some, almost like a, like an homage to kind of her moment when she was kind of left with Cersei to kind of, tend to everyone else back in that great moment in Blackwater in season 2, when she was trying to, like, keep everybody else calm as far as that goes, and I feel like this was kind of another moment where that was her chance to, like, keep everybody calm, and instead she's just doesn't care about it at all. Literally, the only person that she's focused on is Tyrion, as far as that goes. And then Miss Sande just dropping one line of it's like, yeah, if not the Dragon Queen, we'd all be dead. Kind of just casually mentioning that Sansa is really stupid for not trusting Daenerys, at least at that moment. Which, for at that time, I was still on Daenerys' side. I'm like, yeah, Sansa has at least. I'm like, okay, up until this point, fine, I get why she's suspicious, but Daenerys is literally sacrificing her armies and her dragons to defend you. At this moment, you should have no beef or quarrels with her, like, at all, because she's up there doing the fighting and you're sitting down here in the crypts knowing that you are unable to do something. So that kind of still kind of irks me.
Dom, I like the fact that you referenced the Blackwater and just the way Cersei was.
Right.
In the moment of everyone's need, where she's just getting drunk.
Yeah, she's just getting drunk and basically telling everyone, yeah, you're all gonna die. And Sansa's the one that's trying to comfort everybody.
Oh man, what a great performance, what a great scene. And here it is, in Winterfell, and Sansa is not necessarily the young innocent girl who thinks everyone's going to get out of it alive, but there's a difference between her and Cersei, is that Sansa's generally scared and doesn't want to face death in this moment, whereas Cersei sort of accepts it and is drinking and really making everybody's life miserable,
as Cersei does.
Yeah. So I think there is, it's too many seasons apart to say that this is a direct comparison.
Right. But I mean, the moment is very clearly there,
Yeah.
Where, they're in a situation, they're kind of trapped in an area while a major battle's happening, kind of helpless. Their kind of job is to keep everyone's spirits up, based off of, because they don't know, because the outcome is largely not in their favor as far as how the outcome of the battle is going to go. So it's like the illusions and comparisons are there, And really, the last point that I wanted to talk about before we wrap this episode up is Theon. So this is the moment where I've gone back and forth throughout this entire episode, because, like I said, with one of my many problems being the fact that I feel like not enough characters died here. I still feel like there were way too we lost a decent amount of characters in this episode. Don't get me wrong, but I still feel like there were way too many characters that walked away unscathed when they should not have. Like the Hound, okay, he was hiding in another part of the castle away from the fire again, but like Beric and Gendry and Tormund literally have White Walkers crawling over them. Same with Sam. Grey Worm is in a corner. Jaime, Brienne, and Podrick are in a corner. Like, like the fact that all those guys are still somehow hacking it out alive, like that, I still have some slight problems with. I still have problems with the
Hey,
fact that nobody
listen,
died in the crypt. But
Brienne trained them all. You know,
Brienne did trade them all. But the one thing
or
I'll
they
say
have
is,
equivalent
yeah,
training that
yeah,
is at Brienne's level.
Jorah gets, I think, a fantastic death. He dies defending Daenerys. He dies defending his queen, which is what he always wanted to do. It's how he always wanted to go out. I think that death is heartbreaking and masterfully done in every sense of comparison. I think it still really, really holds well. In the opening scene of the next episode, when the first shot you see at that massive funeral pyre is Jorah's corpse and Daenerys saying goodbye to her first friend that she ever made from her homeworld. I still think that death really hits home and is one of the more well-earned deaths in this last season. But Theon is the one where it's like, I go back and forth all the time on Theon as to whether this was an earned death or whether this was just a kind of, okay, this is just our attempt to give him an earned death, but it doesn't actually work in hindsight. Where Theon's whole arc since season 2 has been, like I said, this is about Theon's whole arc has been finding a place where he belonged, right? And so he gets that last validation from Bran saying you're a good man before he charges the Night King and ultimately dies. Like, I don't know what else he expected to get out of his outcome. I have to assume that he knew in some sense that he was running to his death, which is why I'm okay with that. But like, in my mind, he already got that validation from Jon last season, with Jon saying that he was both the Stark and a Greyjoy and that he had ultimately made up for his deeds. So this almost feels like a repetitive act, if you will, with him getting that extra validation from Bran before he goes off to his death. I feel like it almost would have been more impactful if Bran didn't say anything, if Theon was trying to get Bran's attention, but Bran was still stuck in Wargout zone wherever he is, in like the Mines of the Birds or wherever the hell he is, and Theon goes and charges and dies at the hands of the Night King without Bran even knowing ultimately, you know, that Theon ultimately did get his redemption act, but Bran ultimately doesn't know, and even if he did, really doesn't care.
I think the redemption storyline was, I agree with you, already taken care of because, you know, Jon, yeah, he tells him he's okay, and then he goes and he fights his man, and takes control of his soldiers. And all jokes aside about the fact that they Benioff and Weiss got obsessed over the whole missing balls thing. It's the fact is, like, that scene really does land. It really does redeem Theon. His story's pretty much over, but he wants to, fight alongside the Starks. And that all makes sense. But again, he's another character that ends up in Winterfell at the Long Night that basically doesn't have a story to tell. He's just there. I agree with you that sort of Bran, saying you're a great guy, kind of unnecessary because we already know that he's redeemed himself. So I agree with you. Like, just him fighting alongside the Starks and being heroic, that's all that he needed to do. And I guess in the long scheme of things, it doesn't really matter. Theon was sort of there as a bodyguard. He did his role, and that's the end of that. It's one of those things that it's. I think you're right. It's like one of the things that we can see in this episode is the ensemble cast, and like half of them don't really need to be in the story, but they're characters that we know, they're characters that we love, and they're characters that we need to get to some sort of official end, like death, or basically I don't know, they become part of democracy,
which they then probably laugh at.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, it's like, because there's so many characters here, of various weights in terms of importance to the story. It's like they're fishing for moments. We need a Theon moment. Why not?
Right.
He's with Bran, so let's just have it with them. So it's some of these moments, I think, are just like, I think this one is sort of passable. I don't think it's like necessary.
Right. But I agree. It's only passable. It's not something that is, in my mind, nearly as impactful as they intended it to be, because I feel like a lot of the things that they are trying to accomplish, if anything, here have already been accomplished previously. And they're just, like you said, they have so many characters here that they're still trying to give each one of them their moments. And then ultimately that leads to Arya jumping out of the shadows and killing the Night King, which we've already talked about. So the only thing,
if Theon, somehow, like, Theon's actions, I think were a little more directly connected to Arya's ability to
Yes.
surprise the Night King, that would have been better. Like, I don't know if that's what they were going for. Like, but it totally seems like the Night King dealt with Theon, and then was like
And there was
walking
a
Bran.
significant amount of time, and not just because of the slow mo and the dramatic music. Like
Exactly, but
felt like there was so much time to pass between the Night King stabbing Theon, slowly marching up to making sure he was dead. That's right, because he paused and stared at Theon and making sure that he bled out and died. And then slowly walking up to Bran, slowly taking out his sword. I'm like, the dramatic effect is killing me here.
So I just don't know if, like, me as an audience member can correlate that Theon like slowed him down or whatever.
Right.
It's just Arya kind of catches him by surprise. Theon just happened to be the bodyguard. I guess, that extra minute it took to kill Theon was important.
Yeah.
But like, it's one of those things where, again, great episode. It's really enjoyable. I feel like this particular podcast, we just went into nitpick mode.
As if we haven't been on nitpick mode the entire last like 20 episodes or something since the shift.
But I think I think the main thing is, maybe it's like, this is my third go through the series, and I'm just like in that mode of like, well, fantasy booking, as I keep dubbing it. Hey, this could have happened, that could have happened, whatever. I'm kind of in that mood of just saying, like, here's some weak points, here's some strong points. When I first watched this, it was basically like, oh wow, that was like the greatest thing I've ever saw. So, it's one of those things where, I think the episode delivers. It's just when you scratch beneath the surface, you're kind of like, oh well,
Yeah. I feel like that is
some of these characters
for all of that.
Yeah, some of these characters got played out by the
Yeah.
time we got to this episode, and like they really didn't need to do the scene with Theon, but he was there, and like, the reason why Theon got killed is because we don't need him for the other 3 episodes. And I feel like that's a lot.
But that argument could also be made about half the characters that survived this. What's it called? This episode. Like we don't.
True.
I mean, they technically essentially retire half the characters, half the Northern survivors next episode. But like, we don't need Arya for the next couple episodes. We don't need the Hound for the next couple episodes. We don't need.
Well, I think you need a sense of like, after they defeat Cersei, there needs to be a reasonable amount of allies that can keep the 7 kingdoms together. So,
but wait, you mean not just a magical amount of Unsullied and Dothraki that died, and then somehow there was still enough to like make up the army to charge King's Landing? I'm sorry, I don't mean to keep stepping on the Bell's feet, but like that still mystifies me. Like the sheer numbers there. Like they needed to do a count on that. Only last thing that I want.
Listen, they had some troops at Castle Rock. Still, right? When they first took that?
No, I'm pretty sure. Actually, I don't know. They never actually said when they. No, I'm pretty sure they said call back the Unsullied, because remember that was the reason why they had to mark in them.
Grey Worm ends up at the Long Night.
But I'm saying that like I don't think they left any Unsullied there because Euron was bombing their fleet, and Euron's fleet was right there, so they couldn't have stayed at the Castle of the Rock. Any Unsullied that would have stayed there would have been killed.
I'm just making a joke, but the main thing is you're supposed to just believe they're at Dragonstone.
Yeah.
They're, wherever they're hanging out.
Wherever.
They were given the night off. It's like it's like baseball.
They're like, you're not coming north in order to fight for the fate of humanity. You're gonna stay here and guard this castle on the off chance that we lose.
It's like you guys, you fought in some battle before. Like, take the night off.
Only other thing, really, so Melisandre's death, real quick. We got to talk about that for a second, where she just walks outside the castle and just dissolves into nothingness and willingly just ends her life. Like, I don't know. Was there even a point to that at this point? Like, did they just needed a little coda in order to stick on the end there? Like, oh, the massive amounts of dead soldiers just finally, dying. Viserion just passing out after Jon just screams at him for like 5 minutes. Oh, we needed something extra in order to reinforce this. It's like, oh, her role is done, and I'm like, okay, what role was that wasn't already served? She brought ice and fire together, lighting some swords on fire, like telling Arya about a prophecy that gave her the impetus to kill the Night King. Like
she kind of encouraged Arya to do what she got to do, but the main thing is I don't even remember Melisandre's death, to be honest.
Right, because the battle is because you're just letting out that breath of relief after that long battle sequence, and you're like, oh yeah, I forgot. She walks outside the castle, just takes off her magical jewel necklace, and just lets herself dissolve into nothingness.
Yeah, but the dissolve into nothingness. How does that make any sense?
It
Because
doesn't. It makes no sense because
the
she's
last
because she's
last
so
time she took the jewel off,
right. She was just super old and like she just went to bed. So like what? Maybe it was too cold, so she just dissolved away. Like, it makes no sense. It's just there in order to give like again. We've had enough visual spectacular moments that we got to sprinkle a couple little breadcrumbs
Well,
on there.
I guess that's the one thing I will say about this series is that there is the whole idea of knights and ladies and marriage arranged marriages and the time period of the Middle Ages is taken straight from history, and then you have the fantasy elements. And when it comes down to like what is Melisandre exactly, I guess she is some sort of witch slash priestess, but we never really conclude anything about her. We never conclude anything about the gods. We never really conclude anything about Bran other than he's some sort of robotic savant, about the history of, past, present, and future. It doesn't really take me personally to that place of extreme fantasy. Like, yeah, we have the Night King, but all of a sudden it's like unexplained controlling of the weather and all this type of stuff where it's just like you're taking things at face value. And in a fantasy world, you kind of want to dive into the etymology of some of these things and
Right.
really see maybe the evolution of some of
Because
these
that's the whole
powers.
thing that makes seeing magic and cool fantasy on screen function is we understand to some extent how they work, and kind of just throwing visual stuff at the screen without really explaining it again I feel like is something that we've talked about as a big criticism that we've had with this sect of the show, and why we are always kind of this sect of the show, as visually spectacular as it is, will always pale in comparison to those first 4 seasons with how laid out and how detail oriented and how everything kind of meshed together and made sense, how they kind of slowly built in the fantasy, and then I feel like once they made the jump into fantasy, they're just trying to throw as much shit at the screen as they can, that they don't stop to explain really any of it other than like a couple of glimpses, and then afterwards people get bored. They're like, oh, we don't want stuff explained, and it's like, but we have to. I don't know, it's a whole,
I don't know. It's my main thing, I guess, is that I felt like the first half of the series was building us up to like a transition into a little more fantasy, right?
Yes.
The dragons are back in Westeros. The Night King's in Westeros, and he's kind of getting closer to the land of the living. Bran here has the three-eyed raven, and whatever those powers are. The Lord of Light is coming into play because it's getting to that point when all this stuff that has happened in the previous seasons has to be justified because the Lord of Light has some sort of plan. So it's like I just think that stuff was underwhelming in its delivery here in the final season.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I still first 3 episodes of this season I really enjoyed. The last time that I watched through this series, I literally just stopped watching here. And here it is the 3rd time, and because we have 3 more episodes left after this, I'm gonna have to watch those final 3 episodes and really come to terms with, are they good or not? I haven't seen them since they originally aired,
which is crazy.
So,
I will say I have watched. So of the last 3 episodes that we have left to cover after this episode, I've watched, in preparation for our podcasting, right? I've watched 2 of the 3. I've watched 4 and 5. I've watched Last of the Starks and the Bells. I've not yet rewatched the Iron Throne, and I will say that The Last of the Starks and the Bells I have rewatched prior to this, but I will say that these last 3 episodes for me are the toughest to get through. And that's where I'm going to leave it off. That's where we will kind of break as far as waiting for the next 3 weeks.
We'll see if I agree, Dom, because like I said, I hadn't seen them,
they were difficult watches, but I'll get into my reasoning for each one of them. They're not necessarily for the reasons that people think, is what I will get into them, as far as just how my kind of giant conflicting relationship goes. I will say that individually, I don't think every episode is as bad on an individual basis as people say it is. It's more so, once again, kind of the problem with this whole season. A lot of great individual moments that don't really work in the grand scheme of the story that Game of Thrones has been trying to tell up to this point. So with that being said, people, that was it. That was our recap and review of The Long Night, the big spectacle that everyone had been building to, the first of the last 2 episodes that Miguel Sapochnik directed for the show, before going on to House of the Dragon, which currently right now sits at being the most viewed HBO premiere of all time. I think something like 9.99, or sorry, was watching over 2.6 million US homes, surpassing the ratings for the launch of the new season of Stranger Things and Euphoria. So congrats to House of the Dragon. If you guys want to know more about that, you guys can go and check out mine and Professor Pat's recap of it that we just did. What's it called? That is still available on YouTube at the time that this podcast is out. What's it called? Pat, where can the good people follow you on the interwebs?
Hey, you can follow me at Instagram, right? Oh, I totally messed that one up. At Patrick W. Huber on Instagram. I'm posting things there every once in a while. Who knows? Yeah, House of the Dragon. It's going really well.
It is so far indeed. 1 episode in, and already people are going nuts over it. They're happy to be back in Westeros Ultimate. It's good to know that Game of Thrones love was not lost with this final season. And of course, you can follow me at Movie Nerd Reviews across all platforms. Be sure to follow the official Talkin TV podcast across all platforms. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitch. New episodes of Talkin Thrones are released every single Friday on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, at least for the last 3 episodes that we have of the show. Be sure to follow myself and Professor Pat. And as always, people, 12 seasons in a short film, and watch more fucking movies. We'll see you guys next time.